It was a quiet Sunday afternoon in the small suburban neighborhood of Eastfield. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm golden light over the neatly kept lawns and driveways. People were outside, enjoying the calm before the start of a new week. But in one particular house, the calm was shattered by the sound of a car screeching to a halt, followed by the unmistakable sound of heels clicking against the pavement. Lena, a woman in her early 40s, stormed toward the front door of the house she once called home. Her hands were shaking, her breath coming in quick, sharp bursts. Her heart pounded in her chest, the anger bubbling inside her like a storm ready to explode. Inside, sitting together on the living room couch, was her ex-husband, Steve, and his new girlfriend, Claire. They had been together for nearly 6 months now, and though they'd tried to keep their relationship under wraps for the first few months, it was no secret anymore. Lena had heard the whispers, friends, neighbors, even family, talking about how Steve had moved on, how he'd replaced her with someone younger, someone more appealing in their eyes. But it wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the fact that Steve had, in Lena's mind, chosen Claire over the family they had built together, over their 15 years of marriage, the house they'd raised their children in, the promises they'd made to each other, promises that Steve had apparently forgotten. Lena didn't care about the new girlfriend. What tore her apart was how easily Steve had let go of everything they'd shared. And today, as if fate had decided to give her a chance to confront him, Lena had made up her mind. She was going to have it out with him, once and for all. As she reached the front door, her thoughts raced. She wasn't prepared for what she was about to do, but the anger inside her was too much to control. Steve and Claire had no idea what was coming. Inside, Steve and Claire were talking, laughing, almost in a bubble of their own world. Steve had his arm around Claire's shoulder, looking relaxed, like he had everything figured out. Lena's hand was trembling as she knocked loudly on the door. The sound of footsteps echoed inside, and then the door swung open. Steve stood there, his eyes widening when he saw Lena. The easy smile he had been wearing faded, replaced by a look of shock. Claire, sitting just behind Steve, tensed up. Lena didn't wait for an invitation to come in. She pushed past Steve, her eyes fixed on Claire. "What is this, Steve?" Lena's voice was steady, but every word was sharp, like a blade cutting through the air. "You've been telling everyone that you've moved on, but have you even thought about what you're doing to the kids? To me? To yourself?" Steve opened his mouth, but Lena was on a roll now. "You think replacing me with her is going to fix everything?" Her voice cracked for the first time, but she quickly regained control. "I gave you everything, Steve, and this is what you're doing?" Claire shifted uncomfortably on the couch, clearly out of place. Lena's gaze moved from Steve to her, and she felt a cold, suffocating wave of jealousy rush over her. But it wasn't just jealousy. It was the raw, undeniable feeling of being betrayed. Again. Steve cleared his throat, his expression shifting between guilt and defensiveness. He didn't know how to respond to Lena's words. After all, how do you explain to the mother of your children that you were done with the life you had built together? Lena took a deep breath, fighting to keep her composure. She wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. "You know what I never understood, Steve?" She paused, her eyes narrowing. "How did you do it? How did you walk away so easily?" Steve's face shifted, his shoulders tense, as though he was bracing himself for something. Lena didn't wait for him to answer. "You were so quick to forget about the life we built, the promises, the good times. But you know what? I remember everything." Her voice wavered slightly, but she steadied herself. "I remember the nights we stayed up late just talking about our dreams. I remember how we said we'd never let anything tear us apart. And now look at us." She shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "And don't sit there acting like you've done nothing wrong. You think this is just about me, about us. It's about our kids too. They deserve better than seeing their father throw away everything we had for this. There was a silence that hung thick in the air. Steve stood frozen, unable to find the words to respond. Claire sat awkwardly, not sure whether to intervene or stay silent. Lena's eyes, filled with hurt, turned to Claire. "And you," she said, her voice quiet but cutting, "you think you can just step in and replace me? You think you can take my place? You have no idea what you're walking into." For a moment Claire looked like she might speak, but the words never came. The tension in the room was suffocating, and Lena could feel it tightening around her chest. But then, just as Lena thought she couldn't take the silence anymore, Steve finally spoke up, his voice unsteady. "Lena, I never wanted it to be like this." He paused, his face etched with guilt. "But you don't understand. I was suffocating. I needed to feel something different, something new." Lena stared at him, her eyes blazing. "So you thought abandoning everything was the answer?" Her voice was barely above a whisper now, but it carried a weight that made Steve flinch. "You think running away from the family we built is going to fix anything?" Steve opened his mouth, but the words were stuck. Lena's eyes stayed locked on him, her heart racing. This wasn't how she thought the confrontation would go, but now the truth was out in the open. The betrayal, the hurt, everything was raw and exposed. As she turned to leave, one last thought lingered in her mind. Could this family ever be whole again? Or was it too late to fix what Steve had broken? Lena didn't wait for Steve's response. She turned on her heel and walked out of the room, her heart pounding with each step. She wasn't sure if she was walking away from him or if she was walking away from the life she had spent years building. Maybe both. She reached the front door and paused. For a brief moment, she looked back at the house, at the home they had once shared. The house that used to be filled with laughter, with the smell of their kids running through the hallways, their voices echoing in every room. Now it felt empty, cold, like a house made of memories that could never be relived. Outside, the sun was dipping lower, casting long shadows across the yard. Lena stepped out onto the porch, her breath heavy with emotion. She needed to leave. She needed space to think. But then, just as she was about to get in her car, the door behind her creaked open. It was Steve. She turned slowly, already feeling the anger rise again. "What more could you possibly have to say, Steve? I've heard enough," she snapped. Steve's eyes were pained, his face drawn in regret. He took a few tentative steps forward, his voice softer now. "Lena, please, don't walk away like this. He hesitated, trying to find the right words. "I don't want to lose you. Not completely." Lena felt a bitter laugh bubble up in her throat. "Lose me?" She shook her head. "Steve, you've already lost me. You lost me the moment you decided to walk away from everything we had." She swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over. "You think I don't know what I meant to you? What we meant to each other?" Steve's expression faltered. "Lena, please, I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But this..." He glanced back toward the door, where Claire was still sitting. "This isn't about her. It's about me. I was lost. I didn't know who I was anymore. I thought I could just escape." Lena's chest tightened at his words. "Escape? That's all you think this was about?" She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "Steve, I gave up everything for us, for this family, and now you're telling me you wanted to escape? From what? From me? From the kids? From the life we built?" Steve opened his mouth, but no words came out. Lena felt a pang of something deep inside, an ache. She had loved Steve with everything she had, but now, as the years of their relationship seemed to collapse around her, she wondered if it was ever enough, if she was ever enough. "I've had enough of this, Steve," Lena finally said, her voice softer but firm. "You don't get to come here and act like you haven't already made your decision. You've chosen your path, and I have to choose mine too." For a long moment they stood there in the fading light, silence thick between them. Then, just as Lena was about to turn back to her car, a voice called from the doorway. "Lena!" It was Claire. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected Claire to speak up, especially after everything that had happened. She turned slowly, locking eyes with her, her expression unreadable. Claire stood at the door, looking hesitant but determined. I want to say something," she said, her voice shaky but sincere. "I never wanted to hurt you. I never meant to come between you two. I know you're angry. I would be too, but I—" Lena cut her off, her voice sharp. "You don't need to explain yourself to me. This isn't about you. It's about what Steve did, what he's done to our family." Her eyes glinted with something fierce. "You're just a bystander in this mess. You're not the problem. The problem is him." Claire flinched, but she didn't back down. "I know, but maybe this is also about me. Because, Lena, I was with Steve when you weren't. And I know that sounds awful, but—" Lena's patience was wearing thin, but she listened, her jaw tight. "I'm not trying to replace you. I'm not. But I don't want this to be about hate," Claire continued, her voice soft but steady. "I think you still love him. And maybe there's a chance for both of you to heal, to move forward, separately but with some peace." Lena stared at her for a long moment. The idea of peace felt so far away. The wounds were still fresh, still raw, and she wasn't sure she was ready to forgive. Maybe not ever. But then, a wave of exhaustion washed over her. She had spent so much energy on anger and resentment. Maybe Claire had a point. Maybe peace didn't have to mean forgiveness. Maybe it just meant moving on. With one last look at Steve, Lena turned away. She didn't have to say another word. "Goodbye, Steve," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. She walked to her car, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. But with each step, the heaviness seemed to lighten just a little bit. As she started the engine and drove away from the house, Lena didn't feel victorious. She didn't feel like she had won anything. But she did feel something that had been absent for too long: freedom.